I think I wondered if I could build an entire novel on something as small and as seemingly insignificant as a drop of water, right? So even though this looks like an epic book, if I may use that word, in the sense that it spans countries and centuries and cultures, everything in this book is connected via one tiny raindrop. And I did not want to take that raindrop for granted. I wanted to honor that raindrop. And I say this as a writer who comes from the Middle East. For us, water is not some theoretical, abstract question. It is an acute crisis. Today, when we talk about climate crisis, we're primarily talking about freshwater crisis. And it's so easy to forget that we're living in a moment of water scarcity, because we look around, there are flash floods, there are sea levels rising, so it feels like there's an abundance of water. But the paradox, the irony is, amidst that abundance, we're going through water scarcity. There isn't enough fresh water in the world. And of the most 10 water-stressed nations in the world, 7 are in the Middle East and in North Africa. So basically our rivers are dying, and this has massive consequences. Where there's no water, you will see an increase in political extremism, in violence, gender violence. Women are water carriers. When there's no water nearby, the distance that a young woman has to walk increases, unfortunately increasing the possibility for violence on the way or on the way back. So all these issues might seem to be quite separate, but actually they are connected. And I think I wanted to say, if we want to remember how connected we are as human beings with each other, but also with nature, maybe we should look no further than the story of a drop of water. So that's how the story begins. This raindrop falls on the head of a mighty king called Ashurbanipal in the Assyrian Empire. And from thereafter it journeys. And I'd love to, if we have time, say a few words about that journey.
We'll definitely have time. I want to settle on each of the periods and each of the main characters, because I think each is different but has points of connection. But I want to begin actually with the personal aspect. Like you, water is it's a big part of all of our lives, but it's a big part of my working life. The very first case I ever did at the International Court of Justice was a dispute between Slovakia and Hungary over the River Danube. And for more than 30 years, disputes over water have been subjects that I've been very engaged in. Hence, this book touched me very deeply. When did you start thinking about water? Because as children, certainly living in London, not so far from here, you sort of take it for granted. The tap goes on, stuff comes out. And when did you start thinking about water, and how did you start thinking about water?
Yeah, I think a couple of things came together. I'm always interested in ecofeminism, the kind of feminism that tries to connect the dots. And I think we cannot be single-issue people, especially in this age. Like, if you care about climate crisis, you have to care about gender equality. If you care about gender equality, we have to care about racial equality. Or regional equality and so on. So the kind of feminism that tries to look out for those connections, that's very close to my heart. But if I may share maybe a few things, I've been very drawn to this place in Turkey called Hasankeyf. Maybe you're familiar with its story. The old name is Castrum Kefa. We're talking about a 12,000-year-old settlement. Ancient, historically important, archaeologically incredibly precious, but also important for biodiversity, you know. If you go to that place today, you will not find it. It is inundated, it's submerged, because the government in Turkey insisted. They built a dam, a very controversial dam project in that location, which has the lifespan, this dam has the lifespan of 50 years, 50. In order to hog water for 50 years, you destroy 12,000 years history, and also it's not a solution. As you said, we're going to have water crisis, maybe water wars in the future. So we have to find international, global solutions. But that's not the vision. It's very short term at the moment. So that one thing led to another. That took me to the Epic of Gilgamesh. And then when you observe the Thames, I love this river. But we have to bear in mind that this is a zombie river. Not that long ago, the Thames was declared dead, biologically dead. Why? Because we mistreated the river to such an extent that nothing could live inside this river anymore, was the verdict. And yet, the river managed to renew itself, make a new beginning. Today it's home to more than hundreds of biospecies. However, as humans, we never learn anything. And again, as we're speaking today, in the name of greed, in the name of money, water companies are still pumping sewage back into the Thames. So when you follow the journey of water, it feels like you want to question, what is progress? Have we really made progress as human beings? Is history really linear? Does the arc of history really bend towards justice as we want to believe it does? Or is it actually more cyclical, and we have to be aware of those repetitions, the danger of repetitions in human history?
So you start this book back in the Syrian Empire, in Mesopotamia. How did you settle? Tell us more about the character, the main character, how you settled on him and those around him, and why you made that, why you chose that as the starting point.
Yeah, I really appreciate. So you might remember we mentioned how this drop of water lands on the head of this mighty king, who is actually renowned for the library he built, the library of Ashurbanipal, which changed the course of history. So we're talking about the most learned, cultured, educated king that the empire had ever seen. But that doesn't mean he was less cruel than his predecessors. The interesting thing about Nineveh is when it's destroyed, and empires always think they're here forever, but so did Assyrian Empire think. But when everything was destroyed by their enemies, the library was also burnt down. But the interesting detail is, unlike papyrus or unlike paper, if you burn down a library full of clay tablets, you will only harden, you will only make them stronger. And that's how they remained and how they survived under the ground for so long, albeit in shattered form, broken, until French and British archaeologists came and unearthed them, which takes us into another controversial subject. But if I may pause there, the main three characters in this book, they are connected to each other like atoms in a water molecule, like in H2O. So the person at the heart, the oxygen, he's the oxygen in the story, is called King Arthur of the Sewers and the Slums. And there's a reason why he's given this unusual name. He's born in Victorian England. He's born in the slum tenements of Chelsea at the time, into severe poverty, not given any proper education. Had he been alive today, I think we would respect and recognize the beauty of his mind, the neurodivergence of his mind, and appreciate that. But of course, at the time, he gets no appreciation. Purely by coincidence, he comes to the British Museum and he sees these shattered clay tablets that were brought from the Middle East. Yeah? Now, this character was loosely based on an actual historical figure called George Smith. And I was very drawn to this person, about whom we know very little, other than he discovered the Epic of Gilgamesh. He discovered the flood tablet, which is so crucial because what he reads in the flood tablet is a story about an ark or a coracle in which there are human beings, animals, there's a deluge, there's floods, they're looking for land, they fly a bird to see if there's land nearby. The story is very familiar, isn't it? So he realizes it's the biblical story of Noah, except the story he has discovered was written thousands and thousands of years before the Old Testament. So it literally divides the Victorian society into two camps. Those who are more religion-oriented, they would say, well, you see, it shows that the Holy Book was right, it really happened. But those who are more scientific-minded would say, actually, as humanity, we've been telling the same old stories to ourselves again and again across the flow of time.
And stories are really at the heart of everything you write. It's how one generation, one person in one place communicates, often through an oral tradition, but not always, as you've described here, to another community. You pick up this story through the British Museum. you do a lot of research. I mean, it's very clear. Anything you've ever read by Elif, you will understand there is a mountain of research that has gone into it. You must have spent time at the British Museum.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience? I mean, many people here will have been to the British Museum, and I've also, for a book that I've been working on that will come out next year, spent an inordinate amount of time at the British Museum with a couple of objects. Can you say a little bit more about your own experience with these objects and how it connects you to these past times about which you write?
Yeah, thank you so much. So beautiful. So I so appreciate that we're talking about this. I did spend quite a lot of time inside the British Museum, also, you know, bombarding some scholars who are working at the British Museum with my questions, big and small, and
they're fantastic.
They are fantastic.
I don't know if you've dealt with people who are museum curators. I mean, museum curators and archivists are the best in the world. I mean, they are just extraordinary people.
Absolutely, and I'm very grateful to them. I did an insane amount of research for this book. I hope, you know, it will, I don't know, there will be a substance in it when you read it. But it was very interdisciplinary research or interdisciplinary thinking. I love it when we venture, when we go beyond our comfort zones. I like it when a novelist becomes interested in physics, about which I know nothing, or a scientist is drawn to poetry, or a poet becomes interested in film theory. You know, those are the conversations that really, really nourish our minds. And also, I think we need to broaden our reading list. They shouldn't be only Eurocentric. Let's read from East and West, North and South. And the other thing that was very crucial for me was to remember that oral culture and oral storytelling is also very important. Now, I come from a country where history, the way it's taught, is mostly his story, by which I mean the story of a very few men, sultans and Shaykhul Islams, men in positions of power and privilege. But the moment you start asking what was life like for an Armenian silversmith in the Ottoman Empire, for a Jewish miller, for an Arab peasant, for a Kurdish farmer, or a Greek sailor, there's a big silence. What was life like for women in the Ottoman Empire? Huge silence. Or men who had no access to power, you know? What was it like for them? So if we want to understand those silences better, I think we need to turn towards oral culture, oral storytelling, and I had to do a lot of that as well. I think writers need to be a bit like linguistic archaeologists. We need to dig deep into layers of history, try to understand not only the stories, but also the silences. But if there's one important artifact that was very inspiring for me, was the big lamassus. When you go to the British Museum, these incredible sculptures, they weigh between 20 to 40 tons. They're hybrid creatures, part human, part bird, part bull or lion, and they're there. You know, how did they come here? What was their journey like? Some of them were lost on the way. We never talk about this. At the bottom of the river Tigris, there are lamassu sculptures. Because of accidents, you know, they sunk. So there's a lot of loss as well in that story. But if I may quickly add this, one of the many reasons why I love literature, especially the novel as a genre, is because inside novel there's room for pluralism, there's room for nuance, unlike on social media, unlike this divided, extremely polarized world that we're living in. Inside literature there are nuances. So I can be quite critical of colonial institutional history. You might agree or disagree with me, but I think there's a lot of criticism that needs to be done. But at the same time, I can appreciate the genuine dedication of archaeologists, scholars, who, you know, lost their lives, like George Smith. He's buried today in the Middle East between Turkey and Syria because he died there in order to find the missing lines in the poem of Epic of Gilgamesh. So there's a part of me that appreciates him, but there's another part of me that wants to question institutional history. And inside a novel, you can do all of those things, and you can do many more. You can ask questions about what was the Ottoman Empire doing in the meantime.